We'll hear more about that in a second from Dick Morris. Other conservatives echoed that sentiment. Former Congressman Pete Hoekstra says it's a serious discussion, but a debate worth having. Also on the Steve Malzberg Show, Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz says the law violates the spirit of the Constitution. Interesting take from those guys.
John, we appreciate all the headlines, and you set this up perfectly with a story that our friend Dick Morris broke right here last week. So, our Monday Morris memo, more on the Electoral College. And Dick, perhaps for those who were not with us last week, give us a synopsis of what's afoot.
The Democrats have a plan that they've been pushing in stealth, really, without a lot of publicity, to end the Electoral College. They've passed it in 11 states and the District of Columbia, 10 states and the District of Columbia, and in 8 more it's passed one house of the legislature. And the plan is that each state will enact a law that says that its electors must vote for whoever wins the national popular vote, regardless of who wins the vote in their state. And this takes effect when enough states to equal 270 electoral votes, a majority of the college, are bound by this law. And that means that instead of needing 3/4 of the states and 2/3 of Congress to pass a constitutional amendment abolishing the college, you make it irrelevant by a majority of the states voting to bind their electors to the popular vote. California and New York and a whole bunch of other states have already passed this, and the Democrats are pushing it throughout the country.
And in this situation, Dick, when we listen to what's happening here, obviously it appears to, if you're going to amend the Constitution, the argument is you amend it in the ways that are constitutionally acceptable.
Right.
But with this situation right now, these states, in effect, are pulling an end run on the Constitution.
Now, the danger here is that at the moment, it looks like we can stop them. At the moment, it looks like Arkansas, where one house had passed it, that was when they were Democrat, now they're Republican. I think we can stop it. Michigan, one house passed it, but they were Democrat back then. Now they're both Republican. I think we can stop it there, too. The danger is that at some point in the next whatever years, there is a Democratic sweep like we had in 06 and 08 and in more in 12. And if that happens, you could get a lot of Democratic state legislatures throughout the country. So I believe that what we need to do is Republican state legislatures now need to pass a law binding their electoral college delegates to follow the vote of the state. That way, to embrace the Democratic plan, there would have to be a superseding statute passed by both houses and signed by the governor. And that may be very difficult to happen. So if you get a couple of states where there's a split in control, you can stop this plan from taking effect. But right now, it is they're on the verge of 242 electoral votes out of the 270 they need for this to take effect. And if it takes effect, what it means is that the big city Democratic machines produce massive turnouts, fraudulent and real, and they overwhelm the vote. It also makes voter fraud impossible to catch. Right now, if Florida is the swing state, you can investigate Florida, and you can investigate a few counties and catch voter fraud. But if the fraud could be anywhere in the United States, from Hawaii hula dancers to Eskimos in Mexico to South Florida beach people, you can't control it because it's all over the country. You don't know where to look.
One thing, and we'll get to the national situation, the midterms in just a second, but as you were going through this, Dick, and talking about these machinations, I thought back a few years ago, there was a plan that conservatives identified where Soros money was going into certain states to elect Democrat secretaries of state in terms of taking control of the election apparatus. One thing about the left, it never rests in terms of trying to devise new ways to circumvent, even though they claim to be one person, one vote. Seems like they're always up to something.
Absolutely. I mean, look at New York State. New York City probably casts a relatively low vote in presidential races, because why should it? The state's going to go Democratic anyway. And you get districts in Harlem in New York where there are assembly districts where instead of 50,000 voters, you have 10,000 or 12,000. Now, if the national popular vote were the determinant, they would work like hell at bringing out the votes in Washington, in New York, in Detroit, in Chicago, in all of those states which are not swing states, solidly blue states, but where you can influence the national vote. And the potential for voter fraud is enormous.
Now, in terms of votes in the midterm, much has been made heretofore of the fact that the traditional Democrat constituencies tend not to get to the polls with the same intensity in midterms as they do in presidential years. Is there anything that suggests there will be a change this November? I'm understanding, for example, if we take a look at fundraising figures, don't count the Democrats out in terms of money raised.
Well, you can't in terms of that metric. But all the indications are that the Democratic turnout will be less. You measure voter enthusiasm, and something like 35% of voters under 30 say they're going to vote, and 35% of single women say they're going to vote. Latino participation is low. And it's yet to be established that you would have a high African American vote if Obama himself is not directly on the ballot. So I think that there are 13 states that are in play that are Republican, Democratic seats that could go Republican. There are theoretically 2 Republican seats that could go Democrat, Georgia and Kentucky. Georgia I discount because Michelle Nunn has never broken 40 in the polls. And people will find out she's not her father, not a moderate. And Kentucky, that's possible because McConnell is only 1 point ahead.
So this is interesting. In next hour, we'll talk to Matt Towery on the ground in Georgia, where he's detected a decline in Republican intensity, which is interesting with that very heavily populated senatorial primary going on in the Peach State. A little bit more, if you would, please, on Mitch McConnell's situation, because Matt Bevin is challenging him in a primary. You've had a Tea Party influence there, but the wise men are saying he's going to prevail in the primary.
McConnell's ahead by 2 to 1 in the primary. In the general election, he's ahead by only 1 point. But generally, when one of the 2 candidates has a hotly contested primary, particularly an incumbent, he loses votes in the general in the poll, who then come back to him before the election's over. So I think McConnell is going to win. And I think the Republicans have a hell of a chance at picking up to 13 seats. I don't think they'll do all 13, but they could come close.
Now,
the new states that are in play, it's West Virginia, Montana, and South Dakota where there are vacancies, and Republicans will certainly win them. 4 Democratic incumbents in danger: North Carolina, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Alaska. But then 5 new states that are in play: Oregon, Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire, Minnesota with Al Franken, and Michigan, 6. And those are all states that Republicans can win. The Democrats in every one of those states are well under 50% of the vote, and the undecided vote usually goes against the incumbent.
So what happens for the Democrats in terms of electoral finance triage? In other words, these crucial states, are they sitting there right now taking a look at the polling going, okay, we can make a fight here, but we're going to have to pull back here? Is there going to be rationing of resources on the left?
Yeah, there is, and I think you're seeing it already. I think the Democrats have written off West Virginia, Montana, and South Dakota. Those are vacancies where Democrats retired. There's no strong Democratic candidate. The Republican is double digits ahead in each place. The next group that they'll focus on will be Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, North Carolina. Right now they're fighting those all vigorously, but none of those incumbents is over 43% of the vote, 44%. And they're endangered. And then you have the other 6 that they're going to have to defend, and increasingly you got to move your resources back to make sure it isn't a total wipeout.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch what happens here. John, as we're hearing from Dick, suddenly these new states on the horizon. Who would have thought Minnesota, perhaps, with Al Franken?
Well, he won by only a few hundred votes last time. He won only through voter fraud.
But one of the most liberal guys in the Senate.
I know, and one of the most liberal states. But don't forget, they elected Jesse Ventura. They elected Norm Coleman, a Republican. They're an unpredictable state.
Minnesota Mavericks, I guess we could call
also,
them.
Is it oxymoronic to say that Al Franken is a joke?
Oh, we'll let that
Maybe
be
it cancels
your
out. I don't
parting
know.
shot. Thanks very much, Dick Morris. Really appreciate it.
And back with more here on America's Forum. Of course, We want to get to your comments as well coming up later on the show. You can write into us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at NewsmaxTV. The hashtag is America's Forum. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/NewsmaxTV.